So, how do we find the right lobbying job? Well, I'll give some basic advice to prospective lobbyists out there. Members of the third house are often asked for advice from folks interested in finding a job as a lobbyist. And the best advice I can give is probably similar to job seekers in many other professions. In my mind, there are three initial issues that an individual who's seeking a lobbying job should consider. First is to understand the types of lobbying jobs that are out there. The second is to understand what you want to do in the lobbying profession. And then the third is to target potential lobbying jobs that might suit your interests or your strengths. So, first, what are the types of lobbying jobs? In my mind, there are essentially four, and there's no official definition of these. But the government one, meaning you can work for a local, state, or federal entity, state government, all the departments and agencies and many boards and commissions all have a lobbyist, like a deputy director of legislation or a deputy secretary or a director of legislative affairs or government affairs. Then on the private side, you essentially have three. In my mind, the association job, whether it's for the business community like the California Chamber of Commerce, or on the labor side for the California Labor Federation, or an environmental cause like CLCV or California Voters Now. Then you have the in-house GR job, uh, perhaps a healthcare plan or a pharmaceutical company, a high-tech company. They all have an in-house person who could be doing local government affairs, state or federal, or a combination, or sometimes multiple states. And then you have the contract lobbyist, as their name would suggest, they contract with lobbyist employers. Although most lobbying jobs are easily understood by their titles, you know, we want to make you aware of each of those types that are out there. So, what about working in the profession? The main point here is, are there a specific type of bills or regulatory or legislative work that you want to do? Do you like the behind the scenes work, analyzing bills or regulations, writing policy papers, advocacy documents, more what we call the behind the scenes work? Or do you like the personal interaction, being at the Capitol building or a regulatory agency each day, or the Public Utilities Commission, or whatever else? Do you view the legislative advocacy in the same way that you do regulatory advocacy? Do you want to be focused on bills in the legislative branch of government, or on regulatory work in the executive branch agencies and departments? Many lobbyists spend much of their day attending meetings or hearings, monitoring bills, reviewing analyses, writing advocacy letters, providing updates to their clients. And then other parts of their day could be walking the halls of the state capitol, meeting with elected officials and their staff, appearing before committees, perhaps on the regulatory side, meeting with appointed officials and their staff. Which of these roles fits your strengths and interests the best? And then you want to start narrowing your job search. So once you determine, the type of lobbying job and perhaps the field that you might want to be in, you need to think about ways to narrow your search. Again, it could be the type of job, public sector versus private sector, a legislative job versus a regulatory advocacy job. Maybe there's a particular subject matter that you only want to operate in, or do you have some specific background in a public policy area, a certified public accountant? Maybe you want to work on revenue and taxation committee related work, or maybe you want to be a lobbyist for the California Society of CPAs. Whether you work for a business as an in-house lobbyist or at an association as a lobbyist, you need to decide which one you want to pursue. I found that there isn't a great deal of turnover in a lot of the in-house positions, but with more businesses being located in California and even out-of-state companies coming in and having lobbying operations, more and more are beginning to employ an in-house lobbyist, sometimes for the very first time. And while some of these companies will promote from within to fill their lobbyist needs, some of them recognize the value of hiring someone with experience, like an experienced longtime staffer at the Capitol, or maybe somebody coming out of a particular executive branch agency. I've seen more turnover with trade associations, but even some of those don't occur with great frequency. If you want to work as a contract lobbyist, you have to consider whether you want to work for a small firm or a large firm. Most lobbying firms are actually solo practitioners or small firms with 2 to 3 lobbyists. There's only really a handful of very large firms that have, say, 10 or more full-time lobbyists. So where do we find these lobbying jobs? So again, once you've sort of decided on the type of lobbying job you want to pursue and even a potential employer, the next job is to find that particular position. I think there are a number of routes to take, the most obvious of which is similar to other jobs. Word of mouth, perhaps recommendation from a colleague. That traditional route is most often used, especially in the pretty tight-knit lobbying community, such as we find in Sacramento. Letting folks know who are in the business that you're looking for a position, talking with other lobbyists. If you want to be in a trade association, maybe focusing your talks and communications with trade association lobbyists or in-house, or if you want to get into contract lobbying, to do the same. I really think that the more eyes and ears that are open, looking for a position for you, the better off you'll be, and hopefully be able to find your desired job sooner than later. More often than not, potential employers are advertising for these positions now. A lot of these job listings are posted in Capital Morning Report, whose classified section. You do not have to subscribe to CMR in order to gain access. There are other places, the Capital Daybook, Capital Weekly. So these days, almost every open lobbying job can be found in public postings. So if you are in the hunt for one of those, you want to look at some of these sources on a pretty regular basis. Especially, I've seen some jobs that may be posted for 2 or 3 weeks, but some I've seen posted for just a few days or a week or less. So what about getting that lobbying job? Once you've got your ideal job in mind, then obviously you're doing what you can to make yourself the most competitive job candidate to get your foot in the door. You definitely want to understand the profession and some of the players, research and know your prospective employer, have a solid resume, of course, and good references. Most potential employers in seeking out lobbyists are going to appreciate specific work experience, and certainly good references. Having individuals who will be able to vouch for your abilities certainly should be advocating your employment attributes to a potential employer. And you might even want to consider engaging friends or colleagues to walk you through some mock interviews, even. We're often asked how an individual looking for a job can be a solid candidate. And, there's no prerequisite to any lobbying job, of course, but most lobbyists get their positions because of their contacts, their experience in subject areas, or their experience in the building. Many have previously worked in California state government, just like local government lobbyists often come out of the city council or the county government. Federal lobbyists often come out of the federal legislative branch or the executive branch. Now, of course, there are many exceptions to this rule. There are many who have a legal background. Of course, I like to say some of the best lobbyists in Sacramento are attorneys, and some of the best lobbyists in Sacramento are not attorneys. But understand that the lobbying community, at least at the state level in Sacramento, is a pretty small profession. In other words, everybody generally knows everyone else. And so it's often somebody's work that distinguishes them. And the more people who see and know your work, and of course, hopefully it's respected, the more likely you'll have an easier time finding that lobbying job that fits you best, or you might have even be recruited into it. It's critical to have solid work experience where you've developed some areas of expertise, perhaps, definitely some knowledge about the process. You've developed contacts and a good base of relationships that'll help you succeed as a lobbyist. Many employers are looking for lobbyists who are either experts in a field or two. Maybe they practice law, they worked for a particular legislative committee or at a specific state agency or department. And I also like to say that you need to have the right temperament as well as good written and verbal analytical skills and advocacy skills always come in handy. The right temperament and those skill sets, I think, also make a difference as to whether you'll be a better analyst lobbyist versus an advocate lobbyist. I sort of draw an analogy to the legal profession. Sometimes we distinguish between more of a research attorney versus a courtroom attorney, someone who researches and writes analyses, memos, briefs, versus someone who is, conducting depositions or in the courtroom trying cases before a judge or jury. And you need to figure out what position and role fits your strengths and your interests. For individuals who are not currently employed in the legislature or in the executive branch of government, my advice is to get in there if you can, to find a position with an elected or appointed official or a committee or a state agency, because this will enable you to develop public policy area expertise, understand the legislative process or the regulatory process, develop some good working relationships with folks either on the legislative side inside and outside the Capitol, or on the regulatory side inside and outside regulatory agencies. And so I'll say that individuals who are employed at the state capitol or in the executive branch are going to have an advantage, a leg up in that job search. But there are obviously differences that you can pull upon in either your legislative or regulatory work, and that might help guide you to that future lobbying job. Again, to conclude, I think it's valuable to talk to lobbyists who are working in a particular field or the type of a lobbyist position that's of interest to you, and make sure that you really understand what they do, how they operate, how they got their job. But again, what are they doing in their role and how might you get a similar position? I have always found lobbyists to be happy to talk with prospective colleagues, share their insights, their experiences, and how they were successful in getting their jobs, especially their first ones in the lobbying field.